I'm Rosalti Asay and I'm going to report about the communication. What is a communication? Communication is a process of sharing information through symbols, including words and message. The importance of communicating as a function of engineering management may happen between superior and subordinate, between peers, between a manager and a client or a customers, between an employee and government representative. There are four functions of communication. First is the information function. Information provided through communication may be used for decision making at the various work levels in the organizations. Through communications, the information provided will minimize, if not eliminate, the risk. Another concern is the manager who wants to make sure that his decision is promoting an employee to a higher position is correct. The second function is the motivation function. This function is used as a means to motivate employees to commit themselves to the organization's objectives. Third function is the control function. This function is when properly communicated reports, policies, and plans defines rules, clarify duties, authorities, and responsibilities. Effective control is facilitated. The fourth function is the emotive function. When feelings are repressed, whatever types of emotions are involved, communication provides a means to decrease the internal pressures affecting the individual. There are 8 steps in communication process. First is develop an idea. The most important steps in effecting communication. It is important that the idea to be conveyed must be useful or of some value. An example of a useful idea is to how to prevent accidents in workplace. The next step is to encode. To encode the idea into words, illustrations, figures, or other symbols suitable for transmission. The method of transmission should be determined in advance so that the idea may be encoded to conform with the specific requirements of the identified method. An example of an encoded message using telefax as a means of transmission. The next is transmit. After encoding, the message is now ready for transmission through the use of appropriate connection channel. Among the various channels used include the spoken word, body movements, the written word, television, telephone, radio, an artist paint, or an electronic mail. Proper transmission is very important so the message sent will reach and hold the attention of the receiver. To achieve this, the communication channel must be free from barriers or interference, sometimes referred to as a noise. The next step is the receive, the actual receiving of the message by the intended receiver. The requirement is for the reviewer to be ready to receive at the precise moment the message relayed by the sender. Translating the message from the sender is the form that will have meaning to the recipient. The message may be initially received by a machine or a person. The next is decode. Means translating the message from the sender into a form that will have meaning to the recipient. If the receiver knows the language and terminology used in the message, successful decoding may be achieved. If the receivers understand the purpose and the background situation of the sender, decoding will be greatly improved. The next is to accept or reject. Acceptance or rejection is partial. The factors that will affect the acceptance or rejections of a message are as follows. First is the accuracy of the message. Second, whether or not the sender has the authority to send the message and or required action. And the last is the behavioral implication for the receiver. The next step is for the receiver to use the information. If the message provides information of importance to a relevant activity, then the receiver could store it and retrieve it when required. If the message requires a certain action to be made, then he may do so, otherwise he disregard as soon as it received. All of the above mentioned options will depend on perception of the message. The last step in communication process is for the receiver to provide feedback to the sender. Depending on the perception of the receiver, however, this important step may not be made. Even if the feedback is relayed, it may not reach the original sender of the message. This may be attributed to the effects of any of the communication barriers. Communication consists of two major forms. First is the verbal and non-verbal communication. Verbal communication are those transmitted through hearing or sight. These modes of transmission categorize verbal communication into two classes. First is the oral and written. Oral communication mostly involves hearing the word of the sender, although sometimes opportunities are provided for seeing the sender's body movement, facial expression, gestures, and eye contact. Written communication. Alternative to oral communication. The sender seeks to communicate through the written word. The written communication is sometimes preferred over the oral communication because of time and cost constant. The second forms of communication is the non-verbal communication. It is a means of conveying message through body language. Body language consists of gestures, bodily movements, posture, facial expression, and mannerism of all kinds, as well as the use of time, space, touch, clothing, appearance, and the aesthetic elements. Verbal expressions convey many shades of meaning. It is to the advantage of the communication to understand what message are relayed.